Good evening, hello, nice to see everybody, and to join in with you here. We had a very useful and quite powerful visit with Jim Wallace and Susan Brown and I in Ukraine. We went to Budapest first of all, and the Reformed Church in Hungary briefed us and prepared and organised our transport to go over to the border at Berehov. I'm using the Ukrainian word because unless Aaron Stevens comes in and pronounces properly the Hungarian name Berehov, then my Hungarian isn't up to it. But what is it, Berehov, Aaron, is that Berehov? Anyway, so we went through into literally just across the border. As soon as you're across the border, you're into the town, really. And we stayed there overnight in the church diaconal house that was set aside for visitors. But they've also turned the floor of that into a place for people who are displaced from other parts of Ukraine. Now, we've been going in and out of that part of Ukraine for a number of decades and working with the church there over all of that time. And over 20 years ago, the Church of Scotland helped to support the creation of a small bakery there to help the church in its diaconal outreach to feed the local community. Now, what we found when we went this time was that they were producing hundreds and hundreds, over 700 loaves a day, which they were distributing amongst both the displaced and the locally deprived community. So they're not completely turning all the work over only to the refugees. They're still trying to help those in the local community who have a very difficult life, and there's a particularly strong Roma community in that part of the country as well, and they're continuing their outreach to the Roma people. But they've opened all their diaconal institutes, they've opened their educational institutes to host displaced people from different parts of the Ukraine arriving into Western Ukraine, into that area where the Reformed Church is particularly strong. And so we saw the bakery, we saw a food kitchen where people were working to serve over 200 meals a day to the local community. They were providing food parcels, they were providing medical interventions. And so there was a whole list of things that they were able to do. We did speak with a number of the displaced people who were there. By chance, the first woman we spoke to was an English teacher, so that was absolutely fantastic because we had no issues working out what was going on, and she was able to share. I think her name was Lily, if I remember rightly, and she was able to share how they were members of an evangelical church community in the east of Ukraine, but had managed to stay in her husband's dental practice because it had reinforced walls somehow or another, and they felt safer there, and then decided to risk taking their car, to risk checkpoints, to risk bandits on the road, and drive as far as they could. And they managed to get all the way to Western Ukraine, where the Reformed Church was able to welcome them into the one of the diaconal houses there and give them a space and support them. But they were very keen to go back home as quickly as possible. Her town had been the attacks have been repulsed, and she was then talking at the end of May of the possibility of returning and getting back and trying to rebuild life in her own home. And that was certainly something we recurrently heard, that people were keen to get back as quickly as possible and to do what they needed to do in their own country, in their own homes, and try to rebuild. Now, whether she's been able to get back, I don't know, because we didn't exchange contact details, which was probably foolish. But we were trying not to be too intrusive, although 3 people from Scotland is fairly intrusive probably in your life there. with the moderator, we then had also conversations with some of the church leaders there and heard some of their concerns. Not only actually were they sending food, I should say, to the local area, the bakery had also been sending bread as far away as Kyiv. They were doing a daily run to Kyiv with food, which was quite incredible. And they would also fill the bus with essentials, and they would try to bring people out on the way back home from Kyiv. So they would take out provisions and bring back any people that they could bring, particularly children, back to Western Ukraine if they were able to get out of Kyiv and wanted to go. So a lot of practical stuff. Also, we should mention the generosity of congregations, because some £400,000 has been given by congregations to the Ukraine appeal. And we saw some of that money at work when we were there. And we had sent, I think, 150,000 previously. And just a few weeks ago, we sent another 100,000 at the request of the Reformed Church in Transcarpathia and the Reformed Church in Hungary and the umbrella body, which is Hungarian Reformed Church Aid. Now there's a complicated structural issue there, but basically Hungarian Reformed Church Aid covers the Hungarian churches that are in Ukraine, Romania, Hungary, and Slovakia, Serbia, and Croatia. And so it's an umbrella body for all of them, and the aid agency works with all of them. So it was already on the ground in Ukraine, which is why we were able to tap into that work and send the money immediately, because they were already working and knew exactly what was needed and how to get things across the border and into Ukraine, into the right places and the right people for distribution. So that was excellent. The latest tranche went some to the aid agency. Some of it went directly to the Reformed Church in Transcarpathia to support the ministers and the congregations that were distributing all the aid, because the money to keep the congregations is completely dried up, because so many members have fled across the border into Hungary. And so you don't have the people giving them, doing their jobs and getting their money and giving it in the collection plate each week. And so they're suffering there in the church. But through some of these donations that we sent and other international partners are sending, they've been able to support the congregations and the ministers in the congregations, just to give them something to keep them going week by week and month by month, because they're also on the front line of supporting those who arrive in their area. Yeah, one of the other things I think was interesting was they had taken in displaced people into some of their already existing schools, and they worked a lot with Roma, because there's a huge deprived community of Roma people in that area, and they've already built schools, and it's, you know, they're lovely and bright and creative spaces. And if I get the excitement to try to share a screen at some point in the next couple of minutes, I might try and find a picture, but that may be a technicality one step beyond my abilities. But the schools were excellent, but the challenge from the Ukrainian government now was that the school, and if you had a school, you must have a bomb shelter to be able to escape into. So they had been digging out any basement they could find to create bomb shelters, so that if there was anything that happened, they could immediately run down. So any old damp space was being converted to give them at least the capacity to escape if something were to happen. Now, in the 6 months of the conflict, there has been, I think, only one attack in that area, which was on a moving train, and I don't think anyone was killed in it. but it did upset the people greatly, and many people fled after that because they were frightened of being there. But in overall terms, they've been pretty safe from the war because the Russians haven't targeted that part of the country. And they've gone as far as really Lviv, and then you have to cross the Carpathian Mountains to get into this area of Western Ukraine, Transcarpathian Ukraine. And so they've been fairly much protected from the onslaughts that others have been experiencing.
If you could finish in a minute, Ian, that would be good.
I can finish right now, Carol. I'm just going to finish there because I don't need to say anything about our visit to Budapest because Aaron is there and he can very clearly talk for himself about the Budapest angle.
Thanks, Ian. And I know you do have some pictures, and maybe we could put them together and put them up on our Facebook page, and then anybody could get a look at them. Aaron Stephen, he's the minister in our at St Columba's congregation in Budapest, and he's going to share a bit of his story, refugee story. So over to you, Aaron.
Thanks very much, Carol, and thanks to everyone for organizing this and giving us a chance to compare notes and to share the stories of what we're seeing. And congratulations to Ian on pronouncing Beregszás in both the Ukrainian way, which I think is Berehovo, and then the Hungarian way, which is Beregszás. I didn't know that Ian was such a show off, but in any case, it's the fact that we have a place name with the name in two languages says something about the context, because even though we are in Budapest and we are in Hungary, part of our experience is very much the awareness of the fact that there are Hungarians who have always considered themselves Hungarian, who consider their town or their village to be Hungarian, but they are on the other side of the Hungarian-Ukrainian border, and according to our maps, they would be in Ukraine. And so that part of our response or our understanding of what's happening is also an outreach to Hungarians who might be from that area. Just one friend of mine was speaking to us just this week about his brother-in-law and his family who will be coming to Hungary from Ukraine to attend a conference. We have Hungarian families who are from Ukraine, and who maybe you have someone who's come here for work. But one of the great decisions they had to make very early in this conflict was as Ukraine was being invaded, would they abandon their homes to come to Hungary while they could, or would they stay and run the risk of then the men not being able to cross the border? And that's just one of the things that we know families who were affected by that decision. Also at St. Columba's in Budapest, we are an English-speaking congregation in Budapest, the capital of Hungary. So we have an understanding of what it means to be, let's say, an international community, a community of foreigners and locals in Budapest. And because we know what that's like, we've offered our worship space to other international congregations, especially a Russian-speaking congregation, which to now we just called them the Russian-speaking church, but it just so happens most of them, at least the ministers, were Ukrainians, including a Hungarian from Ukraine. And so it's been interesting to see how many Ukrainians were a part of this Russian-speaking congregation. Specifically, our response in the beginning, in terms of just hands-on outreach, was very early in this conflict, and I mean in the first days. We opened up our doors to operate an overnight shelter. The main people who came to us were African students from Kharkiv, from Kiev, from other places. There are quite a number of were quite a number of international students in Ukraine, and because the ones from Nigeria, from Kenya, from Cameroon, they might not speak that much Ukrainian, and yet with English as a common language, we could really open our doors to them. That only lasted about 2 weeks because of a COVID case and just a need to reorganize what we were doing because it had grown so quickly. We shut down for a few days, And then when we reopened, by that time the Hungarian government had changed its response, and they were locating people fleeing from Ukraine all over the country. They might be in a cultural center in a village in the north of Hungary, or they might be somewhere else. And so when we reopened, we weren't receiving guests anymore. They were being directed elsewhere by the Hungarian government. But what we realized was people who were already here still were experiencing food insecurity. So, for example, there were international students who had been placed, again, primarily Nigerians and Kenyans, but not only. They had been placed in a dormitory in Budapest that had no real kitchens they could use. I mean, it was maybe a microwave and that was it. And so we organized with a local African restaurant to provide a hot meal to them each day. That lasted for about 8 weeks for about 20 students or so. I think it got up to 40 students. But by the end of those 2 months, their temporary residence here was running out, because although Ukrainians can stay in Hungary for up to a year with protected status, the third country nationals were not given that length of stay. So their accommodation was limited and their permission to stay was limited. So after providing lunches for them for about 2 months, that program came to a halt. But in the meantime, we started operating a food bank, and the clients who come to us for the food bank are primarily Ukrainians. Right now, we're supporting about 37 households on a weekly basis. Each weekend, they give to us from a given list, they check off the items that they would like, perhaps a kilo of sugar, a kilo of flour, bananas, cucumbers. Cucumbers are one of the most popular items. And we order the fresh produce. That's one thing that has set apart our food bank from many of the others, is that it's not just dry goods, but we'll order the fresh produce and the other items. And on Wednesdays, our volunteers gather to pack each order according to the person's request. And then on Thursdays, the people come to pick them up. When I say the people, I mean primarily mothers who place the order and who come to pick these things up. They might bring their children with them. What we realized was that the first 1 or 2 weeks, there was a bit of awkwardness. They were a bit shy. There's something uncomfortable about coming and just receiving a bag of food. And by bag, I mean an IKEA bag with this wide variety of juice, milk, flour, sugar, spices, cabbages. That's probably the single heaviest item, would be a cabbage. But by the second or third week, we realized that they were chatting with each other in the corridor of our church. So we decided to open up our worship space with cafe tables and fresh baked goods. And that has become a social time for them as well. We're supporting about 37 households. That's coming up to a total of about 125 people. We now have plans to increase that to 200 people a week. It's all done by pre-registration. There is a waiting list. In the beginning, when we set this up, we were partnering with volunteers from our church. We're offering their time. Of course, we're offering the church space. We're using donations given to the church to support this, but another source was just someone in the Budapest community who set up a GoFundMe page. There are volunteers from Budapest that have no other link to the church, and they've now set this initiative up as a separate NGO. So now we've got a kind of partnership between St. Columba's Church of Scotland and the Food Bank Aid NGO in Budapest. That's going to help us organize things a little bit better. We've also had visitors from the British Embassy, the American Embassy, and the UNHCR. And so now we're in the network of partners of the UNHCR that reach out to this, and they've liked our model of doing this, that they're advising some other food banks to do the same. They were having a more, let's just say, long lines coming in to offer to receive whatever had been donated, but our model of pre-registration and customized orders is something that works well for us. The people who come, some of them, it's hard to say whether they will return, or some of them had stayed only until they could go on to, let's say, maybe Scotland or to England, but some have already returned to the Ukraine because that was their goal all along. They were staying in Hungary only as long as necessary, and now even as the war goes on, they want to be part of rebuilding. We're talking about mainly mothers with children, but there are some men, there have been some international students, so it's a mix.
Thank you, Aaron. I'm really grateful for you dropping in tonight. That's the wonder of Zoom. And
it's great.
One of the things that is that has struck me as I've followed your story over the last number of weeks and months is the way that you've adapted, you know, from what you thought it might be at the beginning to what it is now. And no doubt it will continue to adapt. So yeah, so thank you for being here. I know you might have to go before the end, so I'm saying particularly thank you to you at the moment.
Yeah, my apologies to others if I need to leave, but that might happen.
So we're now going to speak to or ask Andrea Fraser to come in and speak about what's happening in Dalgety Parish Church. Dalgety is only one of several, of course, in Scotland where things are happening, but again, they've got a story of what happened in the beginning and how that has changed. And so Andrea, if you would like to take the floor and tell us in the next 5-10 minutes or so your story at Dalgety.
Thanks, Carol. Nice to join you tonight. Yeah, as Carol said, I don't think our story is overly unique about how we've welcomed and adapted and helped those in our community who are either hosts or guests from Ukraine. But we've been asked to tell our story, so that's what I'll do tonight. Obviously, when the war in Ukraine started, like every other congregation in Scotland, we suddenly thought, how do we respond? How do we help? Our members, our folk in the community were asking, you know, what is the church here going to do? Can we donate things? Can we, you know, what is the response? And we thought about that, and we didn't take any physical donations at that time. We didn't, and haven't since, because we didn't feel that was our role. And you know, there's positive negatives for that, but we didn't feel that was what we need to do. What we did do, though, was start to open up our doors to those who were thinking about hosting. And we thought, actually, for those who were looking to offer safe havens to folk arriving in Scotland or in Dalgety or close to Dalgety from Ukraine, actually we could support the host. So that's where we started. We started to on Sunday afternoon, every couple of months, we opened our doors, we put the kettle on, and we said, you know, we're here to support, we're here to listen, and we're here to see how we can respond and support you. You know, is there things that you need to make your guests welcome? Is there things that we can do? You know, not everybody's able to host. However, we have people who could cook a meal for you, who could, you know, provide activity, who could be part of a welcome team, so to speak. So that's how we started. And folk from the church and from the community came along, and we were just, you know, offering that peer support to start with, and that grew. And obviously, Ukrainian guests in our community started to arrive, and we welcomed them to these Sunday afternoon chats, and that was wonderful. And we heard stories, and we really started to respond to the need on that. We had a youth group. We have a youth group on a Friday night, and I think this is probably where most of our work has really bloomed, if you like. Really quite organically and not through plans at all. We just went with the flow, really. So on a Friday night we have a youth group, which is quite a new youth group. It only started in November, and we, you know, from S1 to S6s, you know, an hour and a half kind of pizza and chat is what we were offering. But we realised we had Ukrainian young people who started arriving at the local high school. So we put a message out to them to say, you know, teachers there, they're very welcome to come along, and they did. And they came, and with some of them had very little English, and our lovely Scottish youth who are attending our youth group just welcomed them in, and we got Google Translate on our phones. We played cards. We found ways to communicate which wasn't natural and hard, but we did it, and the young folk absolutely played badminton, took them under their wings. You know, it was absolutely great. From that, we have a group of mums who were obviously nervous about dropping their kids off. So we put the kettle on for them and we just chatted. And that group of mums has now meets at the same time as the youth group. That I would now say our Ukrainian and our Scottish youth are very integrated together, and they go off and they play sports together. They have the wee out together. They eat pizza together. It doesn't feel like there's much separation now between them. And obviously they're now at school with majority of them together, so they're seeing each other on a daily, if not weekly basis. But these mums and others, those who perhaps don't have children with them, or indeed have children that are here, are coming along as well, and they sit in a different part of our church on a Friday night, and they communicate. And initially we sat and we listened and we heard what are their needs. You know, we had English as a foreign language folk come in to assess them, and we arranged that with the council, and literally we've just been a listening ear as well on that groups, and more people are coming. I played badminton with one mum who was just two weeks in, had no English, and we had a right good game of badminton, and you know, that broke all barriers down, and then we got our Google Translate out and we managed to communicate. So it's really just that welcome that we have offered. The Sunday afternoons have continued every couple of months. They're not overly regular. We haven't quite got our kind of pattern that yet, and that'll come. But our last one just felt like family. We had it on the 14th of August, which unbeknown to us was honey harvest day in Ukraine. So our Ukrainian guests all brought honey and cake with them, and we celebrated their festival just by chance on that Sunday, and we heard stories, and also it just felt like family. You know, our kitchen was buzzing, you know, and it's that radical hospitality. You know, we've made you a cup of tea, and we'll continue to make tea, but you're also welcome to make tea in our kitchen too. You know, it's that kind of, you're welcome here. This is your space as much as our space, and that's been really, really successful. And again, none of this has been planned. We didn't sit down and think this is what we're going to do. We just opened the doors to see what has happened. What we noticed at that last kind of Sunday gathering that we had was the fact that some of our older members of our congregation came along and they started speaking to the young Ukrainians who are obviously very much missing their grandparents who are still in Ukraine, and there was just lovely conversation that happened. One lady told me a story that she had given her phone number to a 21-year-old boy who was out of the country when the war started, so he didn't return. His parents are still in Ukraine, but he's obviously living here. And she said, I don't know who he'll ever call, but at least he's got my number in his phone. And I thought, you know, that's the sort of welcome. And whether he calls or not is not really the point. The point is he's got a connection that he can call, and he would be very welcome. So that's really what we've been doing in Dalgety, and just listening, being around, you know, sharing their stories of applying for universal credit, to job centre, to trying to get into schools, to buying what they need to buy or source what they need to get, what are they missing, and also, you know, being there when they're showing their pictures of what they are seeing on their social media, because it's quite different to what is being told in our news, and really sharing in their trauma and their grief, and giving cuddles when need be, but also, you know, lots of smiles and lots of laughs, and just friendship is what we've been doing. So I think that's our story. Carol.
Gosh, Andrea, that's a fantastic story. I mean, I've loved the idea of the organic growth of what has happened. Is a bit similar to Aaron's, but also the radical hospitality. I mean, and surely that's what we're about as a church. So I'm now going to hand over to Sabine and David, Sabine and David work with under the banner of SFAR, our Scottish Faith Action Programme, and Sabine's going to give us a little bit of an overview of where things are in Scotland, and then introduce David to us.
Thanks, Carol. It's really nice to be with you, and it's hard to follow on after 3 such great stories. As Carol said, I'm Sabina, and I lead our Scottish Faiths Action for Refugees programme, which is about supporting and equipping congregations as they seek to reach refugees and asylum seekers in their communities, and various other pieces of work. So I'll give you a brief overview of where we're at in Scotland. I think that's quite useful, and then just a few pieces of information that you might also find useful. So you might well know that there are 3 schemes under which people will arrive under in Scotland. I won't go into the details. There's a Ukraine family scheme, which allows applicants to join family members to stay to join them here in the UK. I mention that scheme because whilst many family members are able to join their own family members in Scotland short term, mostly there's not enough space in people's homes for people to actually stay there long term, and that's important when we think about an additional need for hosting. There's also the Ukraine Extension Scheme, which allows Ukrainian nationals and their immediate family members to apply for permission to stay if they already are in the UK. And then the scheme that most of us will know most about is the Homes for Ukraine scheme, whereby Ukrainian nationals and their family members can come to the UK if they have a named sponsor. And under this scheme is the Scottish Super Sponsorship Scheme. And that allows Ukrainians to come to the UK without having a named sponsor, but they are going to being put up in temporary accommodation until they can then be matched by the Scottish Government with a host or other long-term accommodation. So to give you a bit of a sense of numbers in Scotland, in total, just under 15,000 Ukrainians have arrived across Scotland. And the number of visa applications is just over 40,000 before the Super Sponsorship Scheme closed. So there's about 25,000 Ukrainians still to arrive. At the moment, for those who have already arrived, that amounts to about 17% of all UK arrivals, and Scotland is hosting the most per head out of all 4 nations. And so in the midst of this, and as you've just heard, churches across the country are doing a wonderful job of welcoming Ukrainians in their communities. And we have had the joy of receiving external funds from ACTS to employ David Moody to work alongside churches who specifically would like to reach out to and support Ukrainians. And so before I hand over to David, I'd like to say a couple of things that you might find useful. The numbers might give you an indication. We are entering quite a critical time in terms of ensuring that there is sufficient, safe and long-term accommodation available for people arriving. And so if you haven't yet, I would like to encourage you to consider hosting or encourage members in your congregation to do so. It is important to recognise probably that this is a difficult process, and there might still be 1 or 2 people even on this call who are still waiting to be matched and are doing so patiently. And there is a bit of a bottleneck in the system, but expecting that even more hosts will be needed as more people arrive, but also as the initial 6-month placement with host comes to an end and might not be extended. there is a real need. So please do consider this earnestly and pass it on to others. We have put together a guide for hosts, just with some key considerations for you to think about before you host, and we'd obviously always love to chat to you as well if you would find that useful. And if you would also find it useful to find out numbers of how many people there are in your local authority, etc., please do get in touch. And so just a couple of other resources, apart from us as people who are here to support you in any way. There is an offer from Gideon. They have a large number of Bibles in Ukrainian. So if you would like to have some Bibles in Ukrainian to pass on to people that you are connecting with, then I will share an email address in the chat, and we can maybe share it in the follow-up email as well. You can get in touch with Gideon's and they will send you some. We've also seen in various places a number of Ukrainians needing to access food banks, especially as they wait to be matched up with to receive universal credit, or indeed with an increased cost of living, some hosts might need extra support. And so David has put together an excellent resource sheet that churches can give to Ukrainians who might be attending their food banks with really important information on rights and entitlements and where they might be able to get extra support as well. And speaking about rights and entitlements, the Scottish Refugee Council has produced an excellent sheet on the rights and entitlements that Ukrainians who arrive here have. Sometimes it's really difficult to navigate how things work here and what you're allowed to access in terms of healthcare and housing and how. And so this is a really comprehensive resource that is available in English and Ukrainian. And so actually, if you don't speak the same language, but you can both look at the same document and kind of figure out what you're talking about. So we'll put all these in the chat, and I hope you find them useful in your day-to-day interactions. And as I say, it's wonderful to hear from Andrea, and just such a great example of how simple in some ways it is to be that light in your community, and yet how joyful and probably also challenging sometimes it is, but nevertheless enriching. So do feel encouraged to venture on the same path if you haven't yet. And I will hand over to David to tell you a little bit about who he is and what he has been up to.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you all for coming tonight. It's lovely to get to speak to you all. My name is David Moody. I have been working as Church's Support Officer for Scottish Faith Action for Refugees. I've started this summer. My role is, as Sabina said, to support and to work with congregations that want to in turn support Ukrainians in their communities. And there are lots of ways that can be done. We've talked about hosting and how important that is, and actually one of the things that makes hosting much more of an option for people is if they have a community around them, that they're not doing it on their own, that actually a whole church can get behind them. So that can be a really great way. We heard about all the amazing stuff going on in Dalgety. There's lots of opportunities like that to support Ukrainians, mostly really through community, starting social clubs, starting lunches. One really good suggestion that came from the chair of the Ukrainian Association, she was saying how important music is to all of us, but Ukrainians especially, and what church doesn't have a hall with a piano in it? And actually that might be a really lovely opportunity to provide space for a singing group, or just a chance for people to connect through that part of their culture. And then in terms of practical responses as well, in fact, churches already do so many things that are going to be fantastic. Things like food banks, things like parents and toddler groups. What we can help with is providing resources like that that sheet that we've put together, the information sheet, so that you can have access to more practical resources. and kind of connecting with organisations that might be able to do simple things like translating signs so that people know where the entrance is in their own language, but just helping to adapt the many things that churches already do in order to make them just accessible for Ukrainians in their community. And we can also try and help connect churches with, because many of you will have already been coming across Ukrainian people because you're hosting, because they're just coming across your services. If you haven't and you're wanting to connect, we can sometimes help with that. We've been working in parts of the country where there are large numbers, so we've been trying in Leith to connect churches up with the people who are living on the ship in Leith Harbour, and we're going to be doing a similar thing in Paisley, in the kind of connecting with the hotels near Glasgow Airport, so that where there are large numbers of Ukrainian people in this temporary accommodation, that churches are able to come in and provide community and support, and getting past that, because the councils and the government have done a really good job of making sure that everybody has their basic needs met, that they're fed, they're housed, but there are many needs beyond that, and I think that's where churches have an incredible opportunity to step in to provide that community and that kind of support, and often spiritual support as well, recognizing that actually a great many Ukrainian people have faith, and actually that's something that we can connect with them over. So there's so many ways that churches can respond, and we exist to help with that. So if there's anything you need advice on, anything you want support on, or anything that you just think that we might be able to help with, please do just get in touch. I would absolutely love to meet you. And actually, if you're already doing stuff, it would just be lovely to hear about it, so that we can then share that with other churches. If you've heard about a great resource, in fact, one resource that's really helpful, that might be one for you. Vodafone have a scheme whereby charities can take SIM cards and then distribute them to people who need them, including Ukrainians, but not excluded to. There are lots of other groups that they're allowed to give it to. The only reason we know about that was because a Church of Scotland minister brought that to our attention. So there's lots of things like that. So if you want to know more, please do get in touch with Sabina or I, and we would be happy to meet with you, to chat with you, and just to figure out how you and your community can support Ukrainians around you.
Thanks, Sabina and David. It's good to put it in context of the wider picture in Scotland as well. So thanks to everybody who's spoken tonight, and now's the time to open the floor for any comments or questions from anyone. If you want to use your yellow hand in the reactions, if you can't, I can't see everybody on my screen. If you can't, then just either put your hand up or call out if you have a comment. Come on, who's going to be brave to be first? No comments, no questions.
Carol,
oh yeah, I'm sorry, Bill. Would you like to?
I'm Bill Strachan. I'm up here in Ballachulish in the Highlands. Very interesting, and thanks to the speakers for their input. Very, very interesting indeed. And it's glad to know that what's happening is happening throughout the country. Terrific. My interest, and I'm sure the interest of other congregation members of the church here, is it straightforward, or is it being done to offer short-term, let's say, holidays to refugees and Ukrainians, as opposed to actual hosting long-term, meaning the 6 months? Is it possible that has that been done, or is that possible where refugees and or Ukrainians could come for a long weekend or a week's holiday? Can anyone answer that?
That's definitely a question for Sabina.
Thanks, Bill. I suspect, yes, it can. We have in the past actually received, again, external funding to trial what a holiday or respite programme for refugees can look like. And we actually have a guide online to help churches set up such a programme. At this stage, I suspect because the larger response is still around emergency accommodation provision, and actually it's about getting people into a sense of stability and long-term accommodation, that holidays might be interesting for those who are already in longer-term accommodation and a more stable environment. And possibly the way to do that at the moment is to link up with another local church who is hosting Ukrainians and arrange a connection that way. The local safeguarding policies of the churches, for example, can be followed to arrange it short term. It's a wonderful idea because it might also give hosts a respite for a week or a weekend, which might be a positive experience. But at the moment, I think connecting with another church in Scotland might be a really good way to facilitate that on a one-to-one, church-to-church level.
Sabina, is this something that if you know, might be a conversation, say, between Bill and David to help them find somewhere in Scotland? That'd be something that David might be able to facilitate.
Absolutely, yes. If you really feel like that's something you'd like to take forward, we can help you connect.
How do I get in touch with you, David?
I was just going to say, we'll put David's address in the chat function, and we can send it to you as well, Bill, because we have your email address. But David's address is slightly different than the rest of us because there's another D Moody in the Church of Scotland. So david.moody@churchofscotland.org.uk. But we'll make sure you get that, Bill.
Okay. Right, thank you. We'll certainly be in touch, David.
Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Try and progress that. Good.
Anybody else got a question or a comment? Oh yes, there's a hand. Esther, you'll need to unmute yourself, Esther.
Is that it? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
I've been waiting since April, May for to act as a host for Ukrainian refugees, and the council seemed to be terribly slow. I've been investigated from every level, but nothing seems to be happening, and that's worrying when there are people on ships in Leith, and I have a room here ready for a mother and child or two sisters, and I don't know yet what I should provide. I get asked a lot of questions, but I don't get any answers.
Sabine, that's another one for you.
Yes, absolutely understand your frustration, and actually there are charities and ministers who are raising the exact same questions and frustrations. Unfortunately, there does simply seem to be a large bottleneck at the moment where things are moving a bit too slowly, and there's several reasons for that. It's hard to identify just one, but some of it is also around councils having to recruit extra staff to enable matching, and that all of it taking time. Everything takes time, and I agree with you, it's too long, and I hope you manage to persevere in that. And if you would like to chat about what you can prepare in the meantime and before your guests arrive, we'd be happy to chat with you as well.
Thank you, that would be really helpful.
Patricia?
Hi there. Yes, I've heard under the radar that local hotel is full of Ukrainians, but it's not known widely, and it's obviously kind of kept hush hush. So how can a church, you know, break into that? Do they get in touch with the council housing officer, or You know, there could be all kinds of ways that people roundabout could help these people, but we can't just go and ring a bell at a hotel and appear there, you know?
Yes, absolutely. That is, again, something that we can help connect you in with. So we're, for example, working with Scottish Refugee Council, who also has a bit of oversight about where hotels are being opened, and can help link churches in there, and make also local opportunities known. They're really, generally there's a real desire to link in with local churches. We've had really positive experiences actually across the board. People really recognise the value of local churches, and the resource they bring in terms of friendship and space, and everything that Andrea really described. And so I would, yeah, again, something that we can hopefully help with through our connections.
Okay, thank you.
And Patricia, you're from Aberdeenshire, aren't you?
I am, yes.
Yeah, so another part of the country. So you can see that refugees are not just in Edinburgh and Glasgow, but in other parts of the country too. Anybody else got a question? I can't see any hands at the moment. Please speak up if I'm not seeing you. Oh, there's somebody. Rona?
Thank you, Carol. Thanks, everyone. It's been great. I think Aaron has already gone, but I was in Budapest just a couple of weeks after Ian and co. I think I trotted around Europe at different, just missing Ian. Just, but at that point, it was just they had just started up the food bank, and it was amazing to see how they were operating. But one of the things that is quite striking is things like some things are rationed in Hungary, so you can only buy 1 kilo of flour at one grocery visit. And the same is true if you're ordering as they were doing online. So you've got folk in the congregation who will go every day to a supermarket and buy a bag of sugar or buy a bag of flour, and then they'll pitch up on Sunday with a rucksack full of 20 bags to try and keep this going. And I think that, you know, so you're providing 37 households with enough food for a week. And they also get little vouchers from Lidl, so they can go and buy things they can't get. I was with Aaron when we were at Lidl, and the people in the Lidl didn't know how to deal with putting through all these vouchers, validating them, because people don't normally buy more than one, and he was buying 50 or something. And that, some foods have, you know, we've got inflation, but some foods like the cucumbers, which everybody needs cucumbers because that's kind of a real staple, have like doubled in price in 2 months. And I think it's costing them something like €1,500 a week to do the food bank. And as Aaron said, they're increasing that. So, you know, I think if just kind of raising that, if people want to donate directly to that, I'm sure with the new NGO that would be possible. But it's just brilliant work that they're doing there. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rona. And of course, Budapest, St Columba's has also benefited from the money that has gone to the RCHA and the Hungarian Church. So there is a benefit from money that people have already put in there. Do you want to answer that question, Sabina, or because I see there's another hand up?
Just wanted to add a tiny small comment about hotels again, just so people have a bit more of an understanding. There are about 1,300 Ukrainians arriving in Scotland every week, and the council isn't informed of when flights are arriving, and so accommodation has to be provided very, very quickly, and sourced, you know, within the day, and so sometimes people might be put up in hotels within the day without anybody actually being informed. So that just also as a context for why things might be working a bit slower, but also why you might see hotels being used in your local areas without much community consultation.
Thanks, Sabina. There's somebody's hand. I don't have a name. It just says guest, number 3.
Yes, I think that's me. My name's Liz. I come from near Dundee.
Hi, Liz.
I must have done something wrong when I entered in to get
Don't worry.
name. The question is really about hotels. My daughter-in-law, who is hosting a guest, has met up with some people in Dundee who are staying in hotels, and she was concerned about the vulnerability of some of these folk. They were, you know, sort of 20-year-olds, that kind of age group. Is the plan for these people to be hosted just the same as the people who have already matched up? I mean, what's the long-term plan for these people in hotels?
Yes, hotels are simply just a temporary solution until longer term accommodation can be found with them, either with hosts or other housing solutions. For example, in the west of Scotland, 2 blocks of flats are currently being renovated where people will also be housed. But yes, hotel accommodation is only until longer term accommodation can be found.
Right, so some of these hosts who are waiting to be matched up could potentially be matched up with people who are already here, is that? Yeah.
Indeed, that's how the scheme works. So the reason people are in temporary accommodation is because of the super sponsorship scheme, whereby the point is that people don't have to match with somebody before they arrive, but the Scottish Government enables them to come here without a sponsor and then does the matching in the country.
Yeah, right, thank you.
Thanks. And Anthony and Anne, and then I think we might have to round this off because our hour is just about up. So, Anthony? I can't see you at the moment. Have you unmuted? No, you need to unmute, Anne.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon. Sorry. I very much feel for Esther because she's been waiting since April or May to find a sponsor. This is a lady to find a Ukrainian guest, a lady who's willing to give up a room and prepared to take somebody in. And there are all these people we're told that are coming in and are in hotels and whatnot. And yet she cannot find someone to have in her home. I find this very difficult to understand, no matter what the arguments or the reasons given. It doesn't seem to explain why this lovely lady can't have somebody with her and she's prepared to give up her room. That just doesn't seem right at all. When there's this blockage, there seem to be blockages for things that are so urgent. And anyway, what I was going to ask is, we in Malig, we're living in Malig, we've got 2 people staying with us in our house at the moment, and they're going to go into an extension for the winter. But there seems to be a big need for workers here, and it seems that we need the Ukrainians as much as they need us in hotels and in cafes, and I don't know where all, in the west coast of Scotland anyway, because a lot of places haven't been able to be opened because they haven't got the Europeans that they used to have coming in. And why there can't be I don't understand the matching process exactly, because we weren't specifically matched, and we just said we'd like we couldn't have a family, that we'd like 2 people, and we got a mother and a daughter. So there didn't seem to be a huge amount of actual matching going on. The person that came to see us came after we got the people here, and it all seemed to be quite loose. So I think Esther needs to get somebody quickly. She should be prioritised. And I think these people who have a need of people to work for them should also be prioritised and found and discovered to see whether they can provide accommodation for the people that are working for. I mean, obviously the business season has almost finished now, which is a shame. However, that's just my point. So Esther, I'm thinking of you, I'm saying.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. And I think there's a lot of people in the same position as Esther. I've been hearing several people in that position, and I'm sure it is very frustrating for people. But you know, you raise a good point, and it was a point I had discussed a little bit with Sabina earlier on today. And one of the things she said to me in the afternoon is, every council works in a different way. You know, each council are doing, I mean, it's not that they're doing their own thing, I don't mean it that, but the timeline and the way in which they work. So, you know, different parts of the country they're all just slightly different, and I think that's something we have to take on board. Sabina, I'm going to give you, before we close, and I'm going to give you just a last chance to respond to anything that you've heard tonight.
Yeah, just I share all the frustrations shared there. If I had the power to change it, I would. But you do have the resources to contact your local councillors, MSP, things like that. And I think it's also fair enough to use those resources at hand if you feel led to do so.
Thank you. And I'm just going to finish with a little uplifting story that happened. Was it last weekend or the weekend before last? A lady went to just an ordinary open day in a church one Saturday. They were having a sort of gala day down in South Leith. And after the gala day, she then went to the church on the Sunday with her family, and she saw there a baby grand piano. And she said to the minister, "Oh, could I play the piano?" This was after the service. And he said, "Of course you can." And she sat down and she played absolutely exquisitely. And basically that was her job. She was a musician. And so he said it was absolutely beautiful. And she said afterwards, "Oh, I wasn't very good because I haven't played for a long time because I haven't had the use of a piano." So she has now got the opportunity to go in whenever she wants into South Leith Church and play, and they're hoping that she will play in some of the services for a piece of reflective music at some point. So again, picking up on David's point about music, something very simple can be really enriching and encouraging to an individual. And that lady, just the opportunity once again to play her beloved piano, or a beloved piano, was just the right thing for her at the right time. So it's just seeing these opportunities and making them happen. I look like I'm coming down in a fog here in Carricknow in Edinburgh. I don't know what's happened to my lights tonight, but before I disappear completely, I'd just like to say thank you so much to everyone who's come along tonight. We'll put some of these links and different things into an email and we'll send them round everyone. This whole evening is being recorded and it's going to go up on the Church of Scotland YouTube channel. And so if there's a specific bit you want to hear or share, then that's where it is. But if there's any questions afterwards, you can come direct, particularly to David and Sabina, in terms of what's happening in Scotland and what you can do at your own local church. If you've got something, a question about some of our work in Ukraine or Hungary, then Ian or I would be very happy to answer your questions. And I know Mary MacLeod, our solicitor for the church, has been on this call. She's probably thankful that there isn't the same number of questions for her as there was the last time, but still, if there's any questions about housing people that need to be asked from a legal point of view, she's always there to answer the questions as well. So thank you very much everybody for coming tonight, and I've asked Ian if you will close with just a very short prayer. Ian.
And just as I do, one of the things I should have said was the gratitude of the Reformed Church in Hungary and Transcarpathia was warmly expressed to all the congregations who had so generously shared. And the Bishop, one of his final words to us were, "We're not praying for victory," he said. "We don't want one side against the other. We want to pray for peace and for justice for the peoples of this land and our neighbour. We all want ultimately to live together," were his words. So as we hear of his prayer, let us pray together with some lovely words from our old friend Ian Cunningham. Let's pray. O God, your wounded world cries out in grief and sorrow, pain and fear, and suffering causes some to doubt that you are here beside us. Restore our hope, enrich our faith. Give us courage to believe that in the darkest of our days, you will walk beside us. Let mercy reign, let justice flow. Tear down the walls of hate and fear, till in their place forgiveness grows, because you walk beside us. Let us learn the ways of peace, that all can share the feast of life. Then all the world shall come to see you always walk beside us. Amen.